thanking our soldiers because they were there for the last 2 decades. They were there also collecting harvest for the peasant. They were also there for fighting locusts with the peasants. So it was kind of thanking them for what happened, that standing by the peasants. Later on, we found out it was meant to put our soldiers off guard. And then the last day of the offensive on November 4th, at about 4:30, 10:30 or 11:30, then they were ready to strike. When our soldiers were found out that something was amiss, they tried to call the headquarters for the information, but by the time they do, the telephone was cut off. Again, they had another defector within here in the headquarters who had to change the radio signal of the military forces so that they would be disorientated. The third was to cut off the power. So power was cut off. The military communication signal was switched, and then the telephone infrastructure was cut off. So they were not being able to communicate with each other, even to help out each other. So that's how they strike our Northern Command.
Wow. And what happens during the actual attack? The Prime Minister gave 1 or 2 details in Parliament, but we don't know really the full picture. I think it lasted for some time.
In Mekelle, there were few combatant soldiers. Most of them were staffers, like the administrative people and health and other professionals. Combatants were very few, so it was easier to subdue them. On other areas, there were a number of combatant soldiers. So in the northern aspect, some of them managed to retreat to cross the border of Eritrea, fighting for 3 days, defending themselves. In some of areas, like on the western side, they had to fight 3 days without food and water until the Amara Special Force and then other reinforcement force of military would come and join them and rescue them. On some of the fronts, they tried to negotiate with them. They subdued the commanders, and then they had to negotiate with the lower rank and file soldiers to surrender. Those who were willing had to join them. Still, there are some who were afraid to not to tell them off. Others said no and began fighting. Some of them were killed. Those who were killed were stripped off until our soldiers arrived to the area and rescued the cities. The bodies were not buried. Some of the bodies were found eaten away by birds and like hyenas. So we could not tell whose body was that because the clothes were stripped off. Some of them, they remained for 5 days. Now, the other front, we just heard about their testimony. They fought for 11 days. They ran out their ration. They ran out their water. They had just a very small well of water. And they had to eat a raw sorghum of the peasants only once a day for about a week. And that's how those who retreated to the Eritrea reorganized themselves, armed themselves, and came back and rescued them. And now they are fighting back. So some of them wait 3 days, others 5 days, others 11 days.
Very long time.
Yeah.
One of the things that the TPLF has claimed recently was that they said that that they will continue to fight despite the Prime Minister saying that operations were over. Has fighting continued? We saw yesterday they claimed that they shot down a plane. What do you say to such claims?
Look, 50 years ago, guerrilla fighting was a possibility. One, because there was like the leftist movement, which has a vibe, communism was there, and then just for the sheer enthusiasm of ideology then you could go to the bush and begin fighting. The other aspect was 15 years before, in Ethiopia there was a very brutal military regime. Everybody was subjugated. No one was actually collaborating with the government. And then you had a legal, a moral, and political legitimacy to go to the bush and start fighting. And then 50 years ago, usually it was youngsters who were high school students, university students, and those who were pursuing their education in elsewhere, Europe and America, who came and then tried to salvage the country and then moved in the rights of communism and socialism. Now, the then youngsters are in their 80s, early 90s, and late 70s. And Ethiopia is a democratic country. There is no socialism, there is no communism, which you want to die for. You can win, you can lose only through ballot boxes within the cities and rural areas. You can try your level best to win the heart and mind of people while you are with your kids and the family. You don't have to go to the bush. So there is no moral and political and legal justification for someone to go to the bush and begin. Age-wise, biology doesn't allow it. And context-wise, the whole context is changed. Ethiopian context is changed, and then no one would follow them. But until each and every one of them are apprehended, or until their rank and file would be desperate and lose hope that there is no case to fight, then they may keep on feeding that they would be hell-bent on to keep on fighting, but reality doesn't allow that.
Thank you so much for that. One of the things that we heard in Parliament this morning was a number of parliamentarians calling for the outlawing of the TPLF or its designation as a terrorist group. Is that something that the government is going to do or is considering, please?
So far, yes, there is a wider public call for an OLF military wing, which is now also massacring on other parts of Ethiopia in Oromia, and also now TPLF, which many people do believe, even government believe, that in the last 2.5 years there have been about 113 violences. In most of them were civilians massacred in their hundreds and tens. So in most of these violences, the government believes, and it has very adequate intelligence information, and the public do also believe that TPLF was behind all that in bankrolling, training, and also equipping them and giving them the intelligence information. So because of this, parliamentarians and many other people are urging the government to designate these two elements as terrorist institutions. But the government opted to give it a time, because there are a number of individuals within TPLF also who may not wish to push it to that limit. So for those mild elements to just gain momentum and say no for this extreme very hardline position, so government trying to encourage them to come to the front and then challenge very few hardliners. When it comes to the criminal activities, there are only few against which the government has an issue and against which already arrest warrant is issued. If you take the military, there are about few, nearly 100. If you take the civilian politicians, nearly 100. So we are simply talking about 200 people against which, 200 individuals against which arrest warrants is issued. The rest, they might have mild malfeasance, misdemeanors. So if they repent, it could also be forgiven. Or if there is some mistake that can still be addressed through a proper judicial system, then they can be apprehended, go to the court, and then serve whatever term limit they could be acquitted. So it would be easy and over. So the government, because this country has been in a number of such issues, unless we let bygones be bygones and move forward, then we cannot redress each and every malfeasance, misdemeanor, and crime. So that's why the Prime Minister was pushing it's only through repentance and forgiving that this country can hold together. Because we cannot follow every crime and then bring to justice, because it's too many and immense. That's why even TPLF was allowed to stay on board. Those who've known to have stolen and amassed themselves, government decided not to follow it. So it's okay. They can eat it, but not give us hard time, so that we can move on. So it was given. That's why he was actually adamantly preaching for forgiveness and also peace and loving and fraternity. But they were mocking him as he was not a leader, but he's a preacher.
That is what he said today.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Please, I also wanted to ask you about the role of Eritrea. Now, the TPLF has said that Eritrean troops have crossed the border and are involved in the conflict. We have no way of knowing the truth of these claims. But how do you see the role of Eritrea, and have they been involved in any way?
Let's put it in a context. The Northern Command, as the Prime Minister was saying in the Parliament, was one of the strongest commanders, because, you know, we had been at war with Eritrea 20 years ago, and we had been at odds for 2 decades. So that Northern Command was meant to defend the entire border, the entire northern part of Ethiopia. So every arm, every sophisticated weaponry was put there. The best soldiers were trained and put there. So if that Northern Command was adequate enough to fend off Ethiopia against Eritrea, then it would be too simple for that same army to quell any rebellion within Tigray region. So you don't have to call for external hand, because it would simply complicate issues, both politically and military-wise, because the Northern Command was capable of fending itself, because it had been fending the country for the last 20 years against the same Eritrea, which they now accuse of helping out our soldiers.
Thank you. Could you also tell us a bit about Sudan's role, please? Obviously, they've had a lot of refugees going in there. There's been some concerns expressed as to whether that could be conduit for people to cross back over the border. What is Sudan's role, and what requests has Ethiopia made of Sudan?
Sudan so far is cooperative. We had disputes in a number of areas over borders. Now they put it aside, because they think now we are in our issues to solve first. On the other aspect, whether 30,000 or 3,000 or 300,000 Ethiopians have crossed their borders, and they allowed them until now, and then the number has been increasing from 4,000, 3,000 now about 40,000 or 43,000. It may keep on for a little while. But what we are doing now is, 1, to convince them come back, and 2, because now a large part of Tigray is free. Now even Mekelle is free, so there is no need for people to move to another country, because we can still create a capacity to usher in those who are moving from certain conflict areas to the areas which are now a little bit calmer. So Sudan, we are grateful that they allowed our citizens to cross there. But the fear is, as the Prime Minister was telling to the Parliament, usually when there is a conflict, it is women and children and elderly who would see that are trying to save their lives. In this particular case, women are less, children are less, it's only youth. And then Maikadra is a little bit near to Sudan. And there is a wider, because Maikadra again is now found out to have been orchestrated. That was proven by Amnesty International. That was also proven by our independent Human Rights Commission. That was done by a youth wing. A youth wing, other than the militia and special force. The militia and the special force were encouraging them, abetting them to carry out the massacre. But the youth wing is a separate entity. which is kind of an informal kind of entity. So it could be this use partly. We cannot blame everybody could be a culprit, but there is a possibility that there are also those culprits who've made it to cross to Sudan. Now we have to collaborate with Sudan as to who was who, because now our soldiers are there in the cities and towns where this massacre have been occurred. Now people are have begun speaking out. Now they may also come up with the names of suspects, and these suspects may end up being in that refugee camps in Sudan. Now there are also some indications of some fallout, clashes within that camp. Now these guys, if they are truly the culprits, maybe if we have only 10 or 12 to 20 culprits from this, they are spoiler enough to actually create havoc within that camp too. Now we are going to collaborate with Sudan as to identify as to who is who. If there are innocent ones, look, Ethiopia has been accommodating like nearly 1 million refugees from all our surrounding, Eritrea, South Sudan, Sudan, Somalia. Now our 30,000, 40,000 it's like one neighborhood, so it's easier for us. It was okay for them to cross Sudan border, but now we are harboring millions. We have been also relocating our internally displaced, about 4 million people the last 2.5 years. So we are used to it, to usher in, accommodate those internally displaced or those migrated from elsewhere. So it's not that tough task for us, but some people are trying to make a mountain out of this hill, and some others would also try to keep some hostage and making politics out of them. But otherwise, we are a country of 110 million, so 40,000 for us is like one family.
Thank you. You mentioned that some of the regional militias, like the Amhara militia, had come to assist the defense forces. What exactly is the role of these regional militias, and have they gone into Tigray, beyond the borders? Because obviously there's some disputed land there, so I'm just curious what's going to happen.
I mean, legally, this regional militia and special forces were meant to control and check the crimes and minor violences within their respective regions. They don't have a cross-border dispensation between regions. But what happened then was, because our National Defense Force was attacked, many people were fleeing from Tigray to Amhara region. And because our also National Defense Forces were moving to rescue, but it usually was apparent that it might take a little while, so they have to come in as a support to reinforce our National Defense Forces in the border areas. In some areas, they might have crossed the Tigray region, but they are not allowed to pursue further because they have to retreat back and then check the borders between the Tigray and Amhara, and also to control and fight any petty crimes that might result in from that disorientation and disorder.
Some people have expressed some questions over the future of some of these disputed regions. I think Raya, there's been some history there. What will the government do to address those concerns, please, and what's the future of those disputed regions?
There is a commission which had been constituted by the Parliament, which is the Commission of Border and Identity Issues. I mean, Ethiopia is a diverse country. Most of its nations and nationalities do have their own language and cultures, and that have been actually realized within the constitution. And they might have also respective administrations like special waradas or warada or zone or regional administrations, whereby they can handle their own issues, their own affairs in their administrative border, and also they can be represented fairly at different levels of representation within Ethiopia. But there are some people who still claim that they have a distinctive culture and language which has to be recognized. And then that also has to be studied well and has to be brought to House of Federation for a decision, and then we'll go back for finally to the people to be culminated through referendum on each and every ethnic group which might have some issues to decide on. The other aspect is there are disputes not only between Amhara and Tigray, there are also between southern region and Oromia and also Somali and Afar. So there are a number of cases. The government decided not to handle on a case-by-case basis, but to just study the entire issues and to come up with amicable solution whereby the government or Ethiopia could do away with such claims once and for all and focus on development and then holding together.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Of course, elections are coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the key questions I suppose people in that region might have is whether, if TPLF is not outlawed, would it take part in elections, or would people who used to be members of TPLF but perhaps left be allowed to stand? What, if any, role would they have in elections that are?
So far, there are a number of opposition parties in Tigray, which have been formed in the last nearly 3 and 4 years. I think one is beyond that. So the role of TPLF, I think, is yet to be decided. Because there still is time. Now, there is a caretaker interim administration which is constituted by the parliament. Now it's saying it can still work with the local administration, like at Kabale and Woreda level, because in most of the crimes and allegations, it's only the upper echelon which is to blame. So the middle one, the lower echelon, they might have not even much of a say of what's going on, so they have to follow orders. So when the culprits are brought to justice, apprehended, the middle lower echelon may regroup itself, may rebrand itself, or may wish to positively or constructively involve within building Tigray and building Ethiopia. Or when this operation going on, as you might have heard this morning, so they are scattered now. They left Mekelle and then went out to suburbs and other hideouts. So if they keep on waging attacks on Tigray or Eritrea or other parts of Ethiopia, then the crime would pile up, and then the government would be maybe forced to designate TPLF as a terrorist organ and then follow through to root it out. So it depends on how it behaves from now onwards.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Please, I also wanted to ask you, we've seen some reports circulating that, soldiers who are of Tigrayan ethnicity in the security forces or the civil service or other government-run institutions are maybe suspended is the right word, or staying at home at the moment. Is there a policy on this, and can you talk to us about that, please?
It's actually a stay at home. And if you look at the security institutions like police, intelligence, and army, because one, these people are armed. Two, these people are at the center of intelligence information, which might have significant impact on what's going on. And given the general who was the head of radio signals of the army and the one who switched off to pave the way for the TPLF forces to attack our northern command, and given what happened to again the massacres in Maikadra, again given what happened to some of the leaders of our northern commands who turned against their own soldiers and carried out a shootout, you see that would result in a wider suspicion among each other. Now, if any soldier, which is an anti-Tigrayan, is frantic about a Tigrayan compatriot, he might go to panic, or he may just shoot his brother suspecting that he might do something, even though that Tigrayan brother may not think of anything. But once he begins shooting, the shooting would spiral. So because there is that mutual suspicion, it is good to let these Tigrayan forces and soldiers to stay at home for their own safety, one, for the safety of the entire spirit, the core of the army and officers, both in the office, in the intelligence, in other areas. In other institutions, there are only few, I think, who are Tigrinya-speaking employees who might have been in places of more sensitive areas, who might give divulge information and do something, because that was the case. Not everybody, but few. Now, if you have like 1,000 Tigrayan brothers and sisters, if 5 of them are defects and do something damaging, then others might again suspect these ones. Then it's not only good for your psychology when people are actually looking at you surreptitiously every now and then, that if you are up to something, because that condition is created, that mutual suspicion is created by the Treasonous Act that has happened in the northern Ethiopia. So until this dust settles, it's good for these brothers and sisters to stay at home than to face that surreptitious winking and like talking silently, hush, all the sort of things. It's painful. So it's good for them to just let the dust settle, and also to know who had malicious intent among them, and then to just let know those who are innocent, have been declared innocent and assume their work. So it's just transient, very cautionary action. Otherwise, it doesn't have to do with prejudice in others. But again, you cannot rule out some people due to lack of profound understanding of the whole situation. Some people due to their grudge they might have had before, not in connection to what's going on now, but because of their personal. Some people are very temperamental, that when they see something wrong, so they make a crude judgment against everybody. Due to this different anomalies, you might have some cases of individuals who might have witnessed such misdemeanor or mishandling, which might have occurred both in civilian and military areas. But the government made it clear, is non-excusable. It's only those who are suspected both for the operation and also both for the safety of themselves that were allowed to stay at home. Otherwise, everybody has to be even cushioned further, has to be given extra care and understanding, because they are in difficult circumstances. They should not be suspected. They should not be judged by something which is not of their own fault. Just because somebody who speaks their language did something wrong, they should not be judged. So that is clear understanding of the government. But still, you cannot rule out sporadic mishandlings.
So it's just a temporary policy.
Exactly.
For now.
Exactly. Oh. Is it allowed or?
Oh, of course. Thank you. Just to get some idea, the Prime Minister this morning was giving a lot of percentages for all the different ranks, but I'm just curious overall, what percentage of the security forces now are Tigrayan, the police or the military, kind of overall, the big number picture?
Within the security and police, I think it has been corrected. There has been a massive recruitment and training. Now I think there is not much of a problem there. It's only in the military, in the army area, which the Prime Minister had to say still persists. But again, it's been tried to address, though it's not to the level that the reality calls for. But attempts are made, improvements are there. Still we have a long way to go. But in the police area, it's okay.
Okay. He mentioned, some of the upper echelons. Obviously, it broke them down by rank. So I was just curious, in the military, would we say maybe 10%, maybe 25%? You mentioned there have been a lot of changes. I just wasn't sure what the overall figure was, say, for the military. Do you know that figure by any chance, please?
Not explicitly.
Thank you so much for that. Could I ask, what are the government's next plans now? Now that the offensive has been announced as over, what happens next? Is there an active hunt for the TPLF leadership? What are your plans now, please?
One aspect is, yes, those who are now at large, particularly those who were on the wanted list, the government has to pursue to find out whereabouts and to bring them to justice, because the people are too much curious. Even Ethiopian people are too much curious. One, they cannot be rest assured unless they see some of them are brought to justice, because they are still bragging that they're going to continue attacking. So the people would want them to be actually apprehended. So the government has to do that. The second aspect is to make sure other petty crimes would not be occurred in the areas which now the TPLF forces have left fleeing. So now it has to be filled in so that the normal daily life has to resume. The most important thing, again, what the government is going to do and now planning is to rebuild Tigray again in both aspects. One, in many areas, the roads have been debilitated by the fleeing TPLF forces. They just deliberately destroyed the roads. They broke, the last figure I had was about 8 to 6 bridges. They broke them down, they destroyed them. So we have a number of bridges to rebuild again, a number of cities which they destroyed to rebuild again. That is, and then you saw what happened to Aksum. So that is of physical rebuilding, reconstruction of Tigray. The other aspect is the immediate one, which doesn't give much of a time, is many people in Tigray, even in those days, based on safety net, cash for work, cash for food, type of assistances. So it's only very few who used to live a posh life. Majority of Tigrayans used to live still squalor. It was very much known for its poverty. Even other regions by far are better than Tigray. But people might have a misjudgment by looking at those who are corrupt culprits, very few hundreds, both in generals and politicians, because of their posh life, because of the suspect that they've been turning away money abroad and having accounts elsewhere. All these are regarding few individuals. If you go to the lower middle echelon, even TPLF cadres, they are too poor. They don't even have enough salary to run for 4 months. But again, they have to toil day and night with their parents, with the peasants, both in the rural and urban areas. So most of Tigray still used to live a very poor life. So still we have to salvage Tigray, both economically. And then that's what the Prime Minister was saying, that's what we in the communication diplomacy used to say. Tigray still needs a lot to be assisted. People were looking at only those few individuals who were too pompous and then who were too amassed themselves with all resources. Few hundred. I used to say always, could be 200, could be 5, because we were together, and I know who lives which kind of life, and I had a fight with few of them. Many others would love us, many few who would hate us, and those who hate you is because you know something was going on. Many those in Tigray, they don't even know what their friends were doing here in Federal and in Addis. They think they were as soldiers, as patriotic, as revolutionary as they used to be. But this way corrupt, they just railed and their pay, and they became too bourgeois kind of life they used to live. But their comrades there, they don't know that. That's why when you tell off to their elder brothers, and they think as if we forgot what they did to fight the Derg regime. that was history. Now they changed their personality. They became somebody else. But Tigray is not that. Tigray still is poor, and then Tigray still suffered from maladministration and corruption and nepotism there. So the people are those who still need our own understanding and also our support, both from Ethiopian government, the entire people, and also international friends. Now it's time to rebuild Tigray, both physically, economically. The other aspect is psychological, because many of us do not know what was going on within Tigray. If the rest of Ethiopia is saying that they were suffering because of these culprits, nobody might be able to know until today what traumatic life even the Tigray people used to live. Now it's over, then you see people might make their mind to speak out, and then we'll begin listening stories which none of us might have anticipated to listen to. So psychologically also, there needs a lot of work to regain the confidence of Tigray people to pursue their daily life. So there is a lot of work the government is now planning to engage in a very massive and also active engagement to build Tigray again.
Thank you so much. Please, is there anything that I haven't asked you, a point that you wanted to make that hasn't been raised?
There is only one thing, as the Premier was saying to the Parliament, and I used to respond to you folks, to the media, regarding this negotiation thing. People have no idea how many times that the Prime Minister, the Prosperity Party, religious leaders, elders, and some of us who used to be erstwhile comrades try to prod and coddle these folks to just calm down and let it go. Because we told them they would never be at the helm of that central power again, because they have to be in their rightful place. Now others have the right to claim their rightful place, and then you must be one among us. You must be one among equals. So you cannot keep on calling the shots every time. That is gone. So everybody tried. The Prime Minister tried even to the latest eve of the attack itself with the regional president. And again, given the massacre, given the National Defense Force being attacked with such a magnitude, given the number of rockets and missiles that this force claimed to have and that threatened the very existence of the nation and also neighboring countries, I mean, no country would allow to be told to sit down and talk with such a group. Let's assume it happened. I used to ask the the UK ambassador last time, would you sit if like Wales or Scottish did the same to London? What would the House of Commons and House of Lords say to the executive? Would that order you to go and negotiate, or would that order you to immediately crash and then pursue lasting peace? What would happen if even the largest state in US, California, did that to Washington? Who would sit and talk with such an element? Would anybody tell to Nigerian president to sit down and talk to Boko Haram? Would American government sit down and talk to Al Qaeda every now and then? So there is a limit where you can negotiate, sit and negotiate. Negotiation has to come first. But if every red line is broken, if there is logical absurdity to sit and talk, then the last recourse for you is to subdue and talk with other elements who are willing to move forward. So negotiation, sit down and negotiate, is simple and then palatable for your mouth to say it. But when it comes to the reality, you have to understand what each and every country has to undergo. So yes, we are poor. That's what I say. Ethiopia is poor, but it's not born yesterday. We are a country of 4,000 years. And then in all those days, we try to fend ourselves from aggressors, try to fend ourselves from our own belligerents. And then now we survived until now. So we know how to move on. So the fact that we are poor doesn't mean that we have to be told and babysitted. So it's good to wish a peaceful negotiation, but you have to also know we assume that we have to sit and talk. You cannot prescribe some things that you don't do, you don't allow for yourself. Let's each and every friend and partner sit itself on our shoe and decide one, or let any country who forces to now excoriate the government for not sitting and negotiating give us some example, then we are ready to pick a leaf or two from any country who would tell us that we did it yesterday or this time of a history. That's what I would say was the final remark.
Excellent. Thank you so much. One last thing I would ask is that, it would be wonderful if we were able to travel up and maybe speak to some of the regions, to some of the towns. We would, love to visit some of these areas where the ENDF is, and just see, but that is something perhaps we can discuss later.
Exactly. Yeah. Off the record.
No problem.
Sure. We have done. Sure. Thank you very much.
Do you need any cutaways or anything like this, if that's all right? If it's all right, maybe you and I can just chat.
Sure.
Now. At least not talking. He's just going to...
Oh.